All right.
All right, we're live, we're recording. So,
Woohoo!
one thing I saw that we haven't been doing, and it was highlighted, it said, please each of you state your names at the beginning. So, if we want to go through, I'll start. Kimariehoward.
l.Chesley.
Melissa Holtz, and Ashley Tingy.
Great. Well, we got that done. So,
Awesome.
that was an awesome video, though, wasn't it? Did you
Oh
guys
my
enjoy?
goodness, yes.
That was amazing.
It
So,
was.
I'll start in with the first question then. It says, Dr. George Will discusses many important topics. Choose one that you're personally interested in understanding and then research the following. So out of the topics that he discussed, why did the government get involved in this issue? So maybe if we want to state the topic we researched a little more and then how the government got involved.
Who wants to go first? I can go first. I don't care.
Okay.
Okay. So in this, so one of the things that George Will said in the presentation that he gave was that he quoted, I think it was Ted Kennedy, who said that all great innovations start at the ballot box.
Yeah.
And he proceeded to talk about Eli Whitney and John Deere. And I was thinking about the thing that our government has been involved in recently, which is green energy. And so that was the one that I chose, is that instead of allowing the private sector to be the mover in this, the government has stepped in and said, we're going to finance this. In fact, they call it investing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my issue. That was what I chose, was how they have pushed that innovation. And I don't think it's been effective. So the second part of that, do you want to go through all of that first? Do you want me to just give you that whole thing and then somebody else goes to theirs? Is that how we
Sure.
want to do it?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, so has it been effective? I don't believe so. One of the results was one that was a really big problem called Solyndra. And Solyndra was a solar energy company in California. And I could not find the number, but I think it's 50 billion. It's not 50 million. Anyways, it was a huge number that the government gave to this company to be successful. And in fact, when the company ended up getting the money, they were already at the end. They already knew that they weren't going to be able to make it, that they were not financially viable, but they took the money anyways, and our government gave them the money. And so I don't believe it's been effective. And based on George Will's speech, what could the government be doing right now to help this situation more effectively? I think the best thing, instead of giving green energy companies money to keep going with where they're at, I think that they should be giving them tax breaks for making advancements. I think that that's a better way of addressing the idea that we need better green energy technology, and I think that having the private sector be the driver instead of the government is the way to go. So there's mine.
Well, I agree. And it's funny that you brought up Solyndra because my husband and I were in San Francisco and saw their big plant, the big company, everything, just as all this was going down a few years ago. And just after they got all this money from the government, and yeah, now their doors are closed. They've, after they took all that money. So it's interesting how that works, but it's all for the benefit of research, the benefit of bettering things, and in the long run, it just cost the American people millions and millions of dollars.
Right. Well, if it had been private companies that were deciding to do what they wanted to do, they wouldn't have had an essentially bottomless pocket to pull from. They would have had to decide, we have this much money to put into research and development, and then they'd have to go out and sell it to somebody else to get more money. I mean, they'd actually have to convince people that they're close or that they're, that they're there on the right track. The way it was, they got given a ton of money, a boatload of money, that they essentially just kind of washed down the drain. So, anyways, that was mine.
Yeah, good. Thanks for sharing. Okay, anyone else?
Well, I can kind of share mine. I talked more about, he talked about it too, the No Child Left Behind Act, and how the government wanted to get involved in just making, the students the #1 in the world, and just, the highest test scores, the, highest graduating class or whatever, and just how it fell through, and now we've got other curriculum, the Common Core, and, they think that this is going to help them, and just how ineffective this, Child Left Behind, it just didn't do anything. And so, in another class we're actually talking about schools and how the government, where the government should get involved, and they should give us more money or whatever. And I don't think it's that. I think it's just using the money that they're already giving us to, use the resources in other ways. So.
Good, thank you. Melissa?
All right. So the one that I chose was just the use of food stamps. And so, hold on, let me pull it up. The one thing that I found on it, like why the government got involved, was to strengthen the agricultural economy and provide improved levels of nutrition to low-income households. And I think, overall, it's been effective. It's helped a lot of people who aren't able to necessarily provide the adequate amounts of food for their families, but then there's also individuals who misuse it as well. And so I think there have been both good and bad things that come from it. It's been somewhat effective, as well as in the instances where it's misused, where it's been ineffective. And so I think that one thing to just help with this, to make it more effective, is just to help people understand the actual uses for it and how to actually use it. Because, there's a lot of different things that qualify that necessarily, like the candy and soda and things, that it qualifies as food, but people that by that, I don't know, to me that's just not something that's necessary. And so I think just educating people and helping them understand what they should be using it for.
Good. Yep.
So I have a real quick example from food stamps. So each of my kids have been at different times on food stamps as they've gotten married. Well, not all of them. One of them hasn't. But when they're in school, it's much more difficult to make ends meet. They qualify for food stamps. I have a son who's in med school, and he and his wife, they had to move to where the school was at, and so his wife left her job. Her mom had been watching the kids, and they moved to a different city, and his wife had to quit her job so that she could take care of the kids. They didn't have any family there. So they go through and they qualify for not Medicare, what's the other one? Anyways, they get health care and they get food stamps, and food stamps was new for them. They had never had or been on food stamps before, and he called me and he said, "Oh my gosh, Mom, you would not believe." So we applied for food stamps as soon as we moved into town, and it took about 3 months for it to be approved, and we get to the point where it's approved, and they gave him 3 months back worth of credit on their food stamp card.
Mm-hmm.
So they qualified for $500 a month for a family of, at that point they were a family of 3. They qualified for $500 a month, but they got $1,500 that first month.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all those other months were already gone. They already figured out how to survive and eat.
Yeah.
And so then he's at the grocery store, and he buys his Monster or whatever, the energy drink.
Mm-hmm.
and he figures he's going to have to break out his cash to pay for it. It's paid for on food stamps. And when he called, he said, I could actually go and I could spend, he says, technically, I could spend all of what I've got on my card every month on Monster drinks, take him to school, and I could make money selling Monsters at school, because they don't have them in the vending machines.
Mm-hmm.
He says it's so easy to corrupt the system. It was so easy for them to do whatever. And to be honest, they eat way better than we do. I mean, they eat stuff because he can afford it. They have extra money at the end of the month,
Mm-hmm.
so they buy steak and stuff. It's crazy. We don't buy steak.
Yeah, it is crazy. I know I have a sister that had to go on for a little while, and she qualified. Her family's larger, but $850 a month. I do not spend that on groceries for my family of 6,
Yeah.
So it's crazy. But she said while she had it, she stocked up and built up her food storage. So,
Uh-huh.
that was a smart way to go for sure.
Sure. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, I think it is abused, like Melissa was saying. I think it really, I think all the government programs, the majority of them, are intended to be good,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
but there
Yeah.
is always a loophole and always an abuse and always fraud that goes on in these systems, which corrupts that. So
Right.
the one I talked about was the same as Ashley. I, focused on the Common Core, and I think why I did that is because I've really seen a struggle with one of my daughters, my elementary daughter, with this Common Core and all the requirements. And I think children just learn differently, and everyone learns at their own pace, and everyone has their strong points and their weak points. And so to make them all master, a couple of these proficiencies isn't really fair to these that learn differently. And so, for the government to jump in and say, this is how our kids are going to learn, this is how they're going to be proficient, they're going to be smarter, we're going to be, the best in the world, I think is really unfair to these children who learn differently. And so they're the ones being left behind because they can't, you know, either they don't or they can't qualify up to this Common Core. And so I think it has not been very effective. And the thing is, like George Will mentioned, he says, we're having to dumb down our proficiency levels because they're trying to get the aid. And if the teachers, do not pass them, then they don't get the aid for the school, and the funding's not there. So really all we're doing is dumbing down that proficiency instead of getting smarter. So and I served, I think we talked about last time, I served my mission in Korea, and they're very focused educationally. They're very bright, but they go to school 12 hours a day, and then they're the Hagwon, which is like the library, for 4 hours after that. They are at school all of their awake time, and they can't be kids. So, there's got to be a good balance. And I think personally the government should just stay out of the private sector education and let those who are, over education have that main focus. And when we lived in Florida just last year, the teachers in 3rd grade, that's when they did all their big testing. We had their FCAT, the Florida Comprehensive Assessment Tests, and those teachers the whole year, that's all they focused on was these testing. They didn't help them with other things. They just focused on passing the test. So I don't think, because they wouldn't get their jobs or they wouldn't get their bonuses if their children didn't pass the test. So, it's not a fair way to educate children or for these teachers to be able to teach. So anyway, that's my take on it. So any other comments before we move on?
No.
Okay, so based on George Will's speech, what could the government be doing right now to help this situation more effectively?
Well, considering my topic, considering my topic, which is the way I looked at that question, I think they need to encourage companies to handle it privately and then give tax breaks for those who are working to further the green energy innovations.
Yeah. Any other comments on that?
No.
I looked at it more, not even on my topic that I picked, but more holistically, like how do they have a more efficient government? And, you know, just like George Will talked about, you know, taxes need to be reformed. You know, what did he say? How many times that it's been reevaluated and updated, you know? And then also, you know, the discussion he had about Social Security and, you know, where we're going with that. And then, you know, I think letting American citizens figure out for themselves is the best way to go, rather than the government trying to fix and solve everything in their own way. You know, like he mentioned a lot, government is currently borrowing not for the future, but from the future. And that's not fair for the generations to come. So, you know, I think in this situation, the best thing they need to do is maybe reevaluate some of these things, doing some reform, and then stop borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, you know, per se.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I agree.
So he also, Dr. Will cites a problem no one wants to talk about. What did you guys come up with there?
Well, I actually went to her office hour today because I was hoping that she could point me in the right direction, because I went back to listen and couldn't pick it out. Were you the same too, Ashley?
Yeah, I was like, what problem?
I know, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And if you go back and you listen to the video, what she did is at her office hour, she says it starts at about 26 minutes, and it is the part where he talks about how education, the failures in education, and he said, and then he goes into all the different education things that they've tried to do to make up for it. But then he says that his best friend, I can't remember his name, came out with a report saying that the problem, and this was back in, I think it was the 70s, that the problem was that at that point in the African American community, that 25%, 23%, something like that, were being born outside of wedlock to single mothers. And then he goes on to cite that now, of all babies born now, it's like 35% are born outside of wedlock to single mothers. And in the African American community, it's 70-something percent. And in the Hispanic community, it's 50-something percent. And she talked about how the problem that no one wants to talk about is the breakdown in the family. Because he says, at that point, he says, what happens is that in each of these groups, these children growing up without a father and a mother and a stable family, that they have self-perpetuating cohorts, I think is the way he called it, that are boys that don't have men to be good role models, and that this leads to problems in school and in criminally and all of these things. And though he doesn't come out and say it word for word, Sister Meeker said that it is the breakdown of the family that no one wants to talk about, because they don't know how to solve the problem, and they don't know how much money to throw at it, or even how to do that.
Yeah, that's what I got. I heard the education, and I focused on that at first, and then I re-listened to get a little more detail. And then he talked about the 1 in 3 American children are born out of wedlock, which is going to create disorderly cities, schools that can't teach, problems drive the inequality, and how it cannot be cured by government redistributing incomes. And so, yeah, I think a lot of that is the family and the way that affects every one of these systems.
Hey,
So,
Mom.
you hear my little guy? I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Go.
Anyway, did anyone else have any comments about that?
Thanks, Laura, for clarifying. Can
Yeah.
Well,
going to the office hour.
no, because I really had a question about it, and that was one of the reasons I went to her office hours, because I couldn't, there's so much information in that whole thing that I couldn't pick out the one thing. I thought it was education, but it really wasn't. So.
Yeah, it was more than that. I love, though, how he mentioned the great source of wealth in this country is education and how it adds value to our economy. And so his point was stay in school. You know, I liked how he mentioned that what you're doing here, you know, is benefiting the general population. So, okay, so with Bronfenbrenner's model, how is the issue impacting children, families, communities, and our nation? Any comments on that?
Well, I think you covered it. I think that really, I mean, you read from your notes, but I think that really was the core of that.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, and I liked how he mentioned that the individual is where the creative energy in society is. You know, it doesn't, like Kennedy mentioned, start at the ballot box. It starts with one person. It starts with one thought. It starts with one individual, one idea, and that's what fuels the economy. That's what fuels society, is just that one individual creative thought.
Right. I agree.
Anyway. Any other comments? You sound like you're sick, Melissa. I'm sorry.
Oh, I just have a cough. But as long as I have something to suck on it, it keeps it down. So.
Well, we won't make you talk too much because that's usually makes you cough more. So, according to Dr. Will, one thing you can do for your country is to reserve a spacious portion of your life for which your country is not responsible. Do you agree with this with Dr. Will?
Sorry.
I do.
Yeah, I was going to say I do. I love that, you know, just trying to keep the government small. They don't need to be in every aspect of our life. I mean, they do great things, and, you know, having Medicaid and, you know, WIC or whatever and all these government things to help us are great. But, you know, when they get involved too much, I think they just become more corrupt and you just rely on them more.
Yep.
Yeah, and I agree as well. I think that it's important that not all of our life is, or everything in our life is reliant upon the government, but that we need to be self-reliant too in our lives and be able to depend on ourselves and be accountable for ourselves and not have the government be the one that we rely on for everything.
Mom?
Yeah.
I agree.
I agree. I thought so. Yeah, I absolutely agree with him. I think government's trying to get involved in every private sector, you know, and I think that, you know, it takes away from that free enterprise that this country is based upon. So,
Right.
I agree.
Anyway, getting too involved and too big. So,
Hey.
so in what areas do you personally feel the government should be involved and should not be involved? I'm sorry.
You?
In addressing your chosen threat, the children and families. Does anyone have any comments about that?
So my threat is divorce. In fact, my threat is no-fault divorce laws in particular. And I think that government should be involved in that, in readdressing what has actually been and had a real bad impact on families. So I believe, with regard to my threat, that they should roll back and change the no-fault divorce laws so that you actually have to have somebody who takes the responsibility for ending the marriage and that the other person who is left, the responsible person in the marriage, can be given the bulk of the assets. And because what happens is, what has happened is that since these no-fault divorce laws went into effect, in cases of divorce, women almost always are thrown into poverty when they're divorced. And a man can divorce a woman for any reason, and a woman can divorce a man, but it's generally the worst effect is on the woman and the children, and they're the ones who suffer the impact from those divorce laws. So, for mine, I think that they could roll those back. Do I think they will? No, but I think that they should and could.
And I agree with that. I mean, my threat also is divorce. But I think that's important because as I was doing the different assignments that had to do with that threat, it was just really interesting to see how divorce is so easily obtained these days, and how divorce can be done for any. There doesn't have to be someone at fault, and so I think it would be good if they did require there to be a reason, not just we don't want to be together anymore. So I think go back to the old ones that they had before, the no-fault divorce laws.
Right.
Good. My threat was the examples that parents set for their children. And so, the biggest thing for me is I think the government really needs to let the family control their family and not try to step in. And it made me think of President Obama's comments that he made just a month or so ago, maybe not even that long, that that America does not want stay-at-home moms. That it says it's a choice we do not want Americans to make. But who is he to decide what is good for us and our families? But he's saying America in general, which is speaking governmentally, that's the thing that they do not want Americans to make the decision to stay at home with their children, and that's, completely opposite of what we believe and agree with in the church, and have been taught that the parents are the primary teachers in the home, and we have the responsibility to set that example for our children. And I think when the government tries to step in and tell us how we should raise our family or what we should be doing as parents, it takes away that freedom that we have been given, and government is supposed to be there to secure the rights, not to create the rights or take away the rights. So that was my take on my threat.
Well, mine is a lot of that, mothers going to work and not realizing their roles, and so, I don't think that the government should be the ones that say every woman in America has to go to work. I just don't feel like that's right. It's like you said, they're here to protect us and to secure our rights, not create them. So that was kind of my same thoughts. So,
well, I think the problem is, specifically with what you guys both just mentioned, is that back when the Equal Rights Amendment was really big, in fact, this is what I wrote my persuasive paper on, was that's when no-fault divorce laws began, and the idea was that, in fact, what they said with the Equal Rights Amendment is that they wanted women to have a choice, whether to stay home with their children or to go outside and work. And the whole thing was about choice. Well, somewhere along, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, that kind of turned. So now what they say is that women don't have any value being at home. The value comes from what kind of income they can bring in. So it's not even good enough to go out and get a job at Taco Bell or whatever as part of your choice. You have to be high-powered enough to bring in a large income. So what they've said is that the worth of women within our society is based on what kind of salary they bring in. And it's completely wrong. And it's fine when the National Organization for Women is saying that, and they're some sort of creepy side organization. But what's happened is that when he said that, when Obama said that, he ratified it within in the government. He actually said, "Yeah, we want women to go out and work because they're not valuable unless they're pulling in a salary," and that is so wrong.
Well, and he, kind of ending his term, he's trying to make a new policy that discriminates against the stay-at-home moms because there's going to be tax cuts for those who are putting their children in child care, but not for those who have gone to low income. So, for them to get involved in a personal family affair, I think is completely wrong, and it takes away, what the whole founding of the government really was, pursuit of happiness. And like Dr. Will mentioned, the pursuit of happiness as each individual defines it. So it's not the pursuit of happiness as the government defines it for us. It's the pursuit of happiness how we each define it. If that means me staying at home and being that example for my children, then that should be good enough for the government securing those rights for me, not taking away those rights and punishing me because that is my happiness. So I think, they overstep their boundaries in the whole purpose of the government, in securing those rights and maintaining securing the ability for us to have that pursuit of happiness, because they're taking that away by telling us what happiness should be. So that's my thoughts.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, any other comments, or do we want to sum everything up?
I don't have any more comments.
So basically, in summing it up, we believe that the government needs to step back and just participate in their roles and their functions and not try to get in every sector of the public life and private sectors, and that when the government tries to take so much control, there's going to bring inequality somewhere in society. And so it's taking away the rights and freedoms that the government's supposed to be securing for us, for our pursuit of happiness and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They're stepping over those boundaries, I believe, and trying to tell us what that is for each one of us individually. So, does anyone else have any comments to sum it up?
I don't think so.
Did a good job.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. You guys have a great week, and I will post this.
Okay,
link
who's
on
going to
for
do it
you.
next week? Oh, it looks like it's my turn.
Are you good to go next week, Ann?
Yeah, next week
Okay.
will be fine. So I'll do it next week.
Okay.
Awesome.
Sounds good.
All right, see you guys next week.
All right, take care. Melissa.